morning. Good
Good
afternoon.
morning.
Good afternoon for the Europe folks. Thanks for joining. We've got an interesting episode here, a topic very near and dear to my heart and passionate about intellectual property and how it relates, I think, to not only large companies, but small companies, R&D, facilities, and the people that invest and finance them as well. I think this will be very helpful. So some special guests today. Why don't we go around the room, John and Mary, just talk maybe a little bit about, let's go in depth really about like, what are you doing now and where have you been, and just a little bit of the journey, and then we'll talk about the differences in trade secrets and patents and the particulars, right, that are really driving, I think, global IP strategy for all companies, whether they recognize it or not. So, Mary, why don't you go first?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me, Tim. So I have a company now. I started a company a little over 3 years ago called Crown Jewel Insurance. Our entire focus is on trade secrets, as opposed to other types of IP or even other types of intangible assets like PII and PHI. But before and we'll get back to what I'm doing at the moment. Before I came here, I was a broker in the cyber market for 20 years. So I was there at the very beginning of cyber insurance and saw the fits and starts and pain that the industry and the market went through to develop a product that now is very commonplace and just about everybody has a cyber insurance policy. It's painful to develop a new product in the market where there's no actuarial data and the theoretical losses are just that. But here I am doing it again. And the reason I started this company and I'm so passionate about it is I spent a lot of time working on critical infrastructure industry clients at my last brokerage firm. That was by necessity, really, but I also became very passionate about it because we had something like 25 to 35% of all the large utilities in the country, and then all their for-profit or not-for-profit subsidiaries fell up under them or grew up under them. So we started to see new technologies in green energy emerging even 10 years ago, but they're really on pace now. And one of the things that we used to do, obviously, to work on strategic risk management with our clients was sit down with them midterm every year to talk about what it is that keeps them up at night and what can we do on their cyber renewal the next year to improve their program. And for a long time, the market was getting softer and softer, meaning more and more capacity was coming in. And we were able to push for broader and broader terms. So we were able to get the policies really to where they are today, which is they cover extremely broad, contingent business interruption associated with things like CrowdStrike, depending upon whether or not that was a cyber breach or an accidental outage and how your policy reads, which is interesting. Ask Delta.
Yeah.
The second thing is we knew that we had coverage for ransomware, DDoS attacks, viruses, worms, all the business interruption things associated with that. And of course, there was very broad privacy coverage for PII, PHI, and other personally identifiable data. The one thing we were never able, as sort of leadership, I'll say, in the market, in the brokerage market, we were never able to get the carriers to do was cover the actual value of trade secrets, if those happened to be the asset that were targeted and or stolen during a breach. In our terms, we would call that misappropriation. But it was an interesting exercise talking to the markets over several years, trying to get them to move on this issue. And I think we ran into several challenges about how difficult it is to value these assets. We were just talking about that, Tim. How difficult then it would be to adjust the losses if a claim came in. And several other things around security and protection of those assets, which is very different in a lot of ways than security and protection around other types of digital assets. Because I would say that a huge portion of the exposure in this space is about hiring, firing, exits, non-competes, and non-disclosures, as opposed to purely technical, which is more sort of what we think about in the cyber arena. In any event, we developed this policy wording that is a crime policy that covers the value of trade secrets, basically. We call it trade secret insurance, but really it's a crime or a theft trigger that not only provides a crisis management response that helps the client identify and ascertain the source and scope of what happened, where those assets went, who's got them now, how did they get there, but also allows us to initiate legally the first shots across the bow, to do expedited due diligence, to send a restraining order, to send letters to the new employer of the company that hired your 3 lead engineers, whomever that is. Those types of things, to try to put a bow around it to keep there from being further damage or misappropriation. And if we're not successful at that stage, then the policy actually pays the pre-agreed, predetermined fair market value of the asset as though it's a building that crumbled to the ground in an earthquake or by windstorm in the tangible world.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. So how do you end up with a fair value, I guess, in the beginning? How do you, as a policy, write that policy, right? Like, is it pretty generic, or like, talk us through that a little bit?
I will definitely do that. Should we let John introduce himself first? I kind of went off on a tangent about how I got
here. That'd be great. And John, you go. I'll talk a little bit as well. But John and I have a very kind of interwoven background. So John, why don't you go?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, so been doing IP for 24 years, my 24th year in IP. And Tim and I crossed swords between 2010 and 2014 when we both worked for the same company. We were involved in the height of the sort of patent valuation, patent brokerage, patent licensing market, peri AIA and inter partes review, and those changes made by the US government, which led to this sort of reduction in value of patents quite considerably. So we saw probably the peak of patents valuation with the, if you like, the Nortel sale at $3.3 billion for their patent portfolio. Mm-hmm. And we tracked a little bit of the downturn and then the subsequent downturn. And I think Tim will probably attest to the fact that we both sort of reached the same point. I came down the IP route, and Tim, as I'll explain, came down a different route. But we reached the same point, and that is that patents are no longer what they used to be. Patents don't hold the value they used to be, and patents have been severely undermined, particularly in the United States. And then we both, I think, reached the same point that you need something else. That age-old sort of phrase, or as you said, earlier, Mary, that you need patents, or patents, or I need a patent or I'm going to die, or everything depends on having patents, isn't the answer anymore. You do need patents, as we'll find out, but you need a combination approach, and trade secrets have emerged in the last few years as the most valuable intellectual property right, because yes, they cover inventions, they cover innovation, but also they cover commercially valuable and sensitive information, and that's where most of the value possibly lies, and that certainly seems to be where most of the litigation is at the moment. So Exalt's IP, we cover a whole range of different intellectual property strategy perspectives, big focus on trade secrets, and helping businesses really prepare, hopefully in advance, of any issues related to intellectual property infringement, and particularly trade secrets theft and misappropriation. So over to you, Tim.
Awesome. Yeah. So as John said, we worked together. It was a lot of fun. We used to have intellectual property auctions, live, open outcry, like Sotheby's or Christie's. These aren't Ferraris or Lamborghinis, but people's patents. So very interesting market. We sold a lot of IP. It was interesting because a lot of the early kind of e-commerce patents were being sold kind of in early 2010s that started in the 90s. Names like Walker Digital, right? Priceline.com. And a lot of these old, mobile phone portfolios, right? Like changed hands, like Nortel and even Nokia and BlackBerry, right? Like the titans or the kings of telecom, right? So I ended up moving over, started doing a lot more IP valuation, IP strategy, and IP valuation is very hard. And patents, as John just mentioned, have really gone away, and IP strategy has shifted towards confidential, NDA, private, any kind of proprietary data, which is a much bigger bucket, right, than just patents. And the law is very favorable. That's why you're seeing a lot of litigation, because it is effective, and it is, well, Mary may doubt that on how effective it may be, but so, working with, I had a lot of experience working with auto part manufacturers, pharma companies, telecom, while I was working in the Big Four. I actually worked at MIT for a little bit, and it was, the tech transfer office, and just the whole technology, like innovation ecosystem, and, universities and federal labs, like they really started to shift away from come just license my patents, right? Like, how do I bring a business or a technology to market? It's really shifted to the know-how, which would fall into that nice big bucket that John, I, and Mary are talking about. So small businesses all have trade secrets, no matter what. Even nonprofits, it's customer list data, failure data, just experience, things that have worked, things that haven't worked, right? Like everyone has this proprietary data that falls in this bucket. So yeah, it's been a journey, but why don't we shift over, I guess, to, and maybe Mary can kick it off, talking about this new realm, right, of trade secrets and this big bucket, right? Like I hate to use the word trade secrets just because a lot of people, it's not a common household name on what it is, but it is everything that, and Mary, you might be able to dive into this. Is customer data, like privacy data, fall into the trade secret bucket? And maybe in the insurance world, is that a different line item than that in-house proprietary, right, data, right? Because most regulation and regulatory regimes are pushing for, they're there to protect privacy data. They don't care if you give away your in-house secret sauce.
Don't say that out loud. It makes my skin crawl.
There's not a lot of regulations that are, like HIPAA or GDPR, right?
Except the SEC just came out with a rule that touches on this, and a lot of companies don't know. So yeah, if you don't mind, I'll jump in. Yeah. What we like to say to clients is that we have crime insurance for innovation and ideas. Again, because a lot of people don't understand what a trade secret is, but let me just make this very clear. Patents, once they are approved, are public information. So not only can every competitor in the world see what you're doing, but the Chinese government and the North Korea and everybody else who is after our critical infrastructure know-how can see exactly what we're doing. Why on earth would you publish that in filing for a patent if you can keep it secret? I don't understand. I literally don't understand. The other thing, I recognize that people are giving up in leaving something a trade secret is this guaranteed 20-year solid protection that you get when you file for a patent. So in exchange for making something public, supposedly you have exclusive rights to that innovation for 20 years. It doesn't work that way anymore. To John's point, we've been talking about it. It's all over LinkedIn and all over the internet about how 75% of the claims or something absurd that are brought to the PTAB are invalidated.
Higher.
Oh my God.
Yeah, much higher.
So you're paying to have something patented. You're waiting to get it approved. Now your crown jewel asset is exposed to the public, and then it gets overturned. What?
In just one country.
Even if it's not overturned.
Yeah.
Even if it's not overturned, somebody misappropriates or infringes in patent world, it's infringement, but they infringe upon that asset. The only way to protect it is to litigate. So you're litigating again. You paid to file for a patent. There are a lot of reasons not to patent things unless what you're doing is something that is going to be easily reverse engineerable as soon as it's in the public domain. If you can look at it, feel it, open your iPhone and see all the component parts, yes, you need to patent that. But the software and the processes that are back in the office that nobody knows about. That's how the technology talks to each other, how you set up your manufacturing floor to create less waste, or all those wrong turns you made in your logistics and supply chain function over 20 years that make you better and faster than everyone else. Those are trade secrets, and that's what we're trying to ensure. Companies should really give this a lot more thought, because those are assets that are valuable. They're not, under U.S. accounting rules, unfortunately, carried on a balance sheet unless they're lumped in with goodwill, but they are the lifeblood of a lot of organizations. Small companies, let's just talk about that for a minute. If you're spending more than 10% of your revenue on R&D, every single thing in your R&D pipeline, especially later stage R&D pipeline, any company, is a trade secret as long as you're protecting it, because it was developed in-house. You independently worked on it, presumably. We'll get back to hiring, firing, training, et cetera, in a minute. And it's going to provide you, or is currently providing you, with some competitive advantage or intrinsic value. And you're keeping it secret right now. So if you have a significant R&D funnel that's going to lead to either something you patent or something that you decide to leave as a trade secret, everything in that pipeline is exposed right now and is valuable and insurable. So that's really our primary goal, is to educate organizations that those assets are insurable. Right now, small companies are challenged to get lenders and or investors to give them money if they're not cash flow positive, they don't have any tangible assets. So everything that they're doing is in the creating of something cool and new and innovative, and most likely some kind of AI tool or green energy or whatever it is that is a trade secret potentially. Now, if you value that asset, independently have a third party come in and validate, at least using what you've spent in R&D and some conservative projection of what you hope to make in the future, you can insure that value. And with the insurance, now you can go to a lender and say, the one and only peril trigger that can happen to this asset is theft. And if it gets stolen, we have insurance for that. To me, that's a game changer for companies in the small to medium business or innovative, emerging market space, because it should allow them to have a completely different conversation with lenders and investors on monetizing these assets that are real. They're real assets.
Yeah.
I think those are great points. I just want to. We can't quite cry the death knell of the patent. You still need patents.
Of course.
For licensing potential. Investors, Mary, investors get patents. They don't get trade secrets. So you got to have patents for various reasons. But trade
you hear it on
a
Shark Tank, right? Like Mark Cuban's like, you got a patent for that. You're like,
yeah,
you're bending, rolling over, yeah.
But just look at the news. Just practically, as we know, it's like when you first get your first car, you have a baby, everybody else has got a baby. You've never seen them before. It's the same with trade secrets. Every day in the news now, you'll see a case. So the recent case, Prysmian against Sterlite. An executive left Prysmian, joined Sterlite. He got sued. They got sued. He took customer information. He took new product launch information. And he took the plans for the new manufacturing expansion. $96 million the jury's awarded against Sterlite just a few days ago. And they found $200,000 against the executive for enrichment, illegal enrichment as well. That's customer information. That's product launch information. And that is that's new manufacturing expansion plans. 96 million. Now, this is a company I've never heard of. It's a cable, it's a wire, it's the telecoms and energy company based out of Italy, but they're a global business. That really serves to illustrate to me the value of information. I can imagine if we have a conversation with most execs and we go, what's the value of customer information? I don't really know. What's the value of your new product, launch? What's the value of your product? Haven't put a value to it, as you will find out from your survey, Mary. I haven't put a value to it, but there's 96 million of value associated with that. And that just serves to illustrate that finally businesses, courts are starting to see the value in this information, not just inventive and innovative information, but commercially valuable and sensitive information as well.
Yeah, you talk about large cases. For those who are following the Pegasystems and Appian drama, that was a trade secret misappropriation claim where Pegasystems was found guilty to have criminally, basically, stolen the trade secrets of Appian. Again, senior leadership found criminally liable. The jury came back with a $2 billion award with a B, $2 billion. Both of the Pegasystems stock dropped dramatically on the news of that because that's a big litigation award, but also Pegasystems had not told their shareholders that this litigation was a big deal. They said it was a big nothing burger. So it was a shock to the system, right? Then there's a securities class action based on failure to, do your fiduciary duty, have a plan and response, all of those fun things. That case settled for $38 million, the D&O claim. To my knowledge, that's the first what we call a follow-on D&O claim as a result of an underlying trade secret misappropriation theft. Happens all the time in other types of issues like privacy. The other thing is now the claim has been overturned, at least for the damages part. So essentially the appellate court said, yes, you've proven that there was trade secret misappropriation, but we think the jury instructions were wrong on how to calculate the damages. So they're remanding it, sending it back for further discussion. But these, to your point, these cases are bet the company cases in some circumstances. And the SEC, back to my earlier mention, has finally said under the cybersecurity disclosure rule that public companies of any size have an obligation in their 10Ks to tell their shareholders what they're doing to mitigate any essentially exfiltration or cyber related issue that could reasonably result in a material impact to earnings. Reasonably result in a material impact to earnings. The theft of a crown jewel trade secret is absolutely material. There have been something like 38 8Ks, which now have to be filed following the disclosure of a material item or a DDoS or some other event that's going to be significant on the cyber side. The 8Ks are being filed, but they're not talking properly about the details of what happened and what kind of assets went missing. And at least 3 of the companies have fully admitted that senior leadership, legal, technology, other very senior people in the company's emails were compromised during their breaches. What was attached to those emails? Business plans, documents, drawings, pricing, M&A, discussions, all of those things.
I just want to pick up on something. I'd love Tim's input on this, because I've heard it said a few times that Mary, it's easier for people in court. So if I'm in court and I'm in the jury, Tim's looked at the detail of patents and he understands it extremely well. But explaining to a jury how some technology works, how the cell tower switching mechanism works, and moving a signal from that cell phone to that cell phone as I'm driving down the road, unbelievably impossible. Whereas if you go, Mary, this guy was a plant and he worked at this company and he stole their trade secrets over a period of 10 years and he was feeding them back to the CEO. Here's the evidence. The jury gets that story straight away. Explaining the detail of a patent is really hard, right, to a jury?
And so a lot of these cases, the burden is on reasonable protections, right, Mary? So it's much easier to have a cybersecurity log showing an email or an IP address or this guy was here and they moved there. And there's a digital paper crumb trail, right? And as John said, it's a lot easier to explain to the jury, like they shared the file to their personal Dropbox, right? So it's just much easier than this is an ASIC, AI chip that's got... Forget about it, right?
Right.
Here's the Eastern District of Texas. I'm going to explain to these fine, residents of what how that works. That it's just a much more difficult way to go. And Mary, I think we talked the other day about it's not only trade, the federal trade secret laws. There's also employee contracts, and there's a whole list of legal weapons that you can stand on, as opposed to the federal court the federal district court that's and the USPTO a little stacked against you. So maybe you can jump into those as well, like in NDAs and.
Yeah. So this, I'll somebody said in the chat they wanted to hear about the survey. So
Yes,
this is a nice lead into that, which is great. We were just hired to do a benchmarking survey among in-house intellectual property counsel about where they are in trade secret asset risk management. We kind of married that or mapped it against best practices in trade secret asset risk management. So, which was, by the way, provided by outside trade secret counsel and other people in this space who are doing risk management around trade secrets. So we have where are most of these organizations versus where should they be aspiring to get to, for lack of a better way to say it. And the way that we look at that is kind of more traditional risk management, which is always start with identification. Identify what the it is. What is it that's at risk? Most companies don't even do that. Literally, most of the companies that we surveyed have no formal process whatsoever to identify trade secrets internally, or they have an ad hoc approach. So I will say that a lot of them did have kind of an ad hoc approach, at least within engineering or R&D, which is a good fundamental place to start. Have idea boxes or have surveys going out on a regular basis, or have certainly when they're coming into the organization, they're being given their job description and they're talking about what they're bringing or not bringing with them, which they cannot bring any trade secrets from a prior company. That's also against the law. But we start with identification, then we move to value. What's the value at risk? And then and only then, typically, do you look at the countermeasures, because reasonable measures in any sense of the word can only be applied once you know the value of the asset or the thing at risk. It could be a liability issue as well. So the higher value the asset to the company, the more robust countermeasures you should have in place. But most companies try to just start at that middle level and just throw stuff at the wall and use their regular cyber security defenses and training and everything else that they're already doing because they're required to by law on privacy, PII, PHI, ransomware, phishing, and all of that stuff is extremely valuable. And many, many companies do a very good job at that now. I'm not poo-pooing that in any way, shape, or form. It's just that we don't, we're starting kind of in the middle. So once we get past the reasonable measures, then we talk about, which is mitigation. Then we talk about insurance. So I'm sticking something in the NIST definition that's not normally in there. So identify, value, protect / mitigate, insure / transfer, and then recover. And so it always goes in this cycle. So when we talk to people about the reasonable measures part, we talked about, of course, cybersecurity as a big chunk of it, because a lot of these assets are digitally stored now. Or you can take pictures of them with your phone, et cetera, et cetera. But we also looked at hiring, firing, training, non-competes, and non-disclosures. Those 5 things always from a legal standpoint, because a lot of cases turn on one of those things. Do you have a formal process when you're onboarding people, again, to make sure they're not bringing things with them, whether they're going into engineering or not? They could be somebody who had a very strategic sales or senior leadership position at another company, and they're bringing all of their marketing or M&A or target acquisition plans or whatever it is. Those are trade secrets to their prior company if they're documented properly and they've been told that those are trade secrets. So we look at the hiring and then immediately training. Do people know what a trade secret is? That it deserves sort of a higher level of, just corporate confidential sensitive information, for lack of a better way to put it, deserves sort of a highest and best use of reasonable measures around it. Those things, once they're identified, should be pulled off of the network to the extent that they can, and only given, need to know access to a limited number of few people, et cetera, et cetera. And then we look certainly at non-competes and non-disclosures. Non-competes potentially being banned at the federal level. We'll see. That's supposed to go into effect on September 4th. And then non-disclosure agreements. Of all the companies that we talked to, I would say that non-disclosure agreements, everybody had them, of course. That's a great step, and that is typically with third-party service providers. I think we're going to see a shift towards more traditional non-disclosure agreement with employees if non-competes go away. So that's a paradigm shift and another thing that organizations are going to have to think about and do very quickly, because there's no leeway after the September 4th deadline. But people generally had non-competes in place. What they didn't have maybe necessarily was wording that says that the confidentiality provision of that contract extends beyond the expiration of the contract, and some of the other, sort of minutia parameters that we look for around, did you define trade secret, or did you at least mention the words trade secret as opposed to just confidential information, some of those kinds of things. So a lot of organizations have had good strategies there. And then as far as exiting, a lot of, I would say probably a third of the companies had an exit strategy that was mostly about turn in your laptop, that those kinds of things. But I would suggest not an easy, HR would probably kill me if they heard me say easy, but a thing to do would always be send a certified letter to their home or to their most recent personally known email address, or both, reminding them of their confidentiality obligations of the information they worked on while they were working at your company, find out where they're going to work, and send a letter to that employer. Some of those things where you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's to be able to show that you're treating these assets that have been identified as much more valuable assets than others. You asked him just real quickly about whether or not PII and PHI are a different asset class. You can have publicly available information that everyone has access to that used in a different way can be a trade secret. So if you have hordes and hordes of personal health information on various organizations, but it's what you're doing with it. You've developed a new rating model for life insurance for a certain subset of the population. That sort of rating model is the trade secret, not the data itself, if that makes sense. So it's what you did with it that's the trade secret.
Yeah. Again, some great questions coming in. Let's move to one of the questions in a second. I just wanted to just very quickly on patents, and we can move on from patents because this isn't about patents; it's about trade secrets. But there's been a lot of, you mentioned Mary, you mentioned Tim, that patent annihilation rates at the PTAB, at the AIA, Patent and Trademarks Appeal Board, are really high, and no patent survives unscathed. I think less than 20% survive unscathed. Many previously very strong patents that have survived attacks and sort of invalidity claims previously. I know I was just reading about one that survived those 4 times, was then found to be invalid at the USPTO. And yes, the litigator involved in that said you cannot write a patent now just using standard sort of patentability search. You have to do a full-on litigation level search in order to get a patent that's going to withstand the attacks that it will face if it's a good patent protecting a good valuable product at the Patents and Trademark Appeal Board, which puts a whole different complexion on patenting, and again serves to reinforce the importance of having a balanced strategy of both patents and trade secrets. But Tim, Mary, there's a good couple of questions that have come up. I don't know if it's time to look at those now, but I just wanted to get that point in before it left my mind. Sorry.
We certainly can. I think actually Tim sent a note to us saying he lost his audio, so he may have dialed out and is dialing back in. So we can just keep going while Tim figures out.
Yeah, well, let me read you the question, Mary.
Okay.
It's kind of related.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah,
it's from Nicole Duggan.
Go ahead,
she
John.
says, Nicole asked the question, with the increased threat in employee misuse and misappropriation, the event of a potential trade secret theft seems imminent. What immediate steps should a company take to mitigate damage and protect its intellectual property? And how can insurance frameworks support these actions?
Nice. So yes, if these non-competes and even if let's just say that even if the federal law doesn't go through, there are now 5 states that have absolute bans on non-competes and another 6 or 7 that have some version of it where they're limiting non-competes to certain levels of employees or certain non-exempt or whatever else the case may be. I personally, because I'm crazy, think that the state laws and the federal statute, if they're going to have carve-outs, should target the exemption towards only employees that have access to trade secrets. But that would mean you'd have to know who has access to trade secrets. So to answer the question, certainly, again, looking at non-competes and non-disclosure agreements, hiring, firing, training, those are really the critical things that we look at around employee and third-party service provider sort of independent contractor issues. In addition to how limited their access is and whether or not there's a vault and multi-factor authentication where you can track who looked at which asset when and who tried to download something and, you know, all the technical things that would take an entire Tim could do, but would take a half day to go through. But essentially, without non-competes in place, then you have to really robustly address the other 4 issues. The first thing I would do would be to implement some sort of a policy where every single new employee signs something saying they're not bringing a trade secret or corporate confidential information from their prior employer. You're really obligated as a company to look and make sure that they're not uploading something to the server, even though they're not supposed to, that looks or smells like a trade secret from a prior company. The second thing I would do would be to implement training very quickly. There's some really good training out there. Some of us do training, but there's some really good online training that is easily accessible, that can be done in less than an hour, that would give every single employee really good fundamental knowledge about the difference between a trade secret and a patent, for example, and a trade secret and other types of PII, and tell them what their obligations are to protect those assets. Ooh, that's a nice slide.
Yeah, so I was trying to show this just to kind of add to what you're saying, Mary. Like a lot of it aligns. In big companies, it's very difficult, right? Because these are all in separate areas, Mary. Like so, HR, legal, risk, cybersecurity. Some of them are technical, some of them are non-technical, some of them are policy-based, some of them are, as you said, like digital paper trail, forensics. So, a really strong comment you made before about the employee acknowledging that IP it created is not their own, right? It is the ownership of the company. I think that's really big. That goes a long way in terms of them kind of acknowledging I have a responsibility and I'm not going to take these proprietary assets with me. So the rest of it's just kind of proving that, but I'm sure this is probably a little too small, but I wrote a paper on Medium about this, just, you know, all these departments at a big company working together and how they can, you know, collaborate to put together a strong case, right? So when they want to work
I think that slide says a lot, Tim, and it's a very, very valuable slide. I loved it when you brought it out a couple of months ago, but the point you just made, I think, is great. It's not just the legal department. It's not just the IP department. It's not just engineering. It's not just HR. It's the whole business. It's finance. Yes. It's manufacturing. Everybody needs to have a good understanding because everybody is in touch with or holding trade secrets. And unless everybody's trained, contractually obligated to defend and protect trade secrets, you will get leaks. I think in that same paper, Tim, you talked about the insider threat being the biggest threat. Often it's inadvertent. Sometimes it's malicious and deliberate. Oftentimes it's inadvertent. We didn't really understand that was a really valuable trade secret. And in that conversation with our supplier, our customer, we divulged it, we shared it. It was innocuous, it was beneficial to the conversation. Boom, it's gone. You know, the value is diminished, it's gone, it's lost. You know, inadvertent disclosure of trade secrets. But, you know, I think it's a cross-company issue. I like your comment, Tim, earlier that trade secrets is probably a bad nomenclature. You know, in the UK, people kind of go to me, well, we're not James Bond, you know. We don't do industrial espionage. We don't do international, you know, crime and theft, and it's not us. It doesn't relate to us. Talk to me about something that relates to my business, and so we need to get better language to help people really get their heads around. This is information, it's sensitive information. It's information you don't want your competitors to get hold of, because that's going to cause you some weight damage, loss in margin, and a loss in profit, and a loss in competitive advantage. That's what we're trying to talk about. And I think, explaining that in a way that resonates with teams and with departments is the key challenge to getting this inculcated into businesses.
Yeah, and I think, if we were to be asked, which, we are asked quite often, we don't have a dedicated in-house trade secret counsel. Our risk management department is very busy, or if we don't even have a risk manager, then this is really difficult for us. Then if we had to put these in order, the first thing would be to shore up the front and back end of your own employees, which means change your onboarding policy, immediately train everyone on what a trade secret is and how to protect it. Once at the end of that training, you could have a question at the very end to ask every single person to tell you what they're working on that they now believe could qualify as a trade secret. Somebody else will go in and look at the technology and the protection around it. But certainly if it should qualify, or it does qualify, absent something different in the information security realm, then IT and legal and everybody can go do something different with that asset, and then shore up what happens when they leave. And then the second part, the next step, I think, would be to start with R&D and engineering on the actual identification of all of the assets that are, low-hanging fruit. The ones that
somebody said, a good friend of mine, former colleague, said to me, Mary, he said, don't go to the engineering guys and say, what trade secrets have you got? Go to them and say, what's really cool? What's really interesting that you're working on? What have you spent a lot of time, or what have you spent a lot of money on in the last several months? Tell me about those things. And then it's over to you as the IP guy or whatever your position is, the champion, to interpret and to determine whether that might be a trade secret. That might be patentable. That might be a trade secret. That is valuable, etc. But ask the engineering guys what's cool and what's interesting, and work from there. And don't introduce as few additional systems as possible. Try and make it sync with their workflow, and then you'll start to get stuff coming through rather than interjections and interventions.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're starting to dig into the data classification realm and data governance. Big companies have these people that classify information. Is it private? Privacy data? Is it proprietary data? And this has wider ramifications than what we're talking about. This is really at the crux of, do I use AI? And if I use AI, do I expose confidential proprietary data to models that's flowing outside the company? Yeah. So getting getting organized and getting a data classification system and kind of marking things and marking
and an documents. AI policy, to your point, Tim, an AI policy.
Yeah, so it's gonna rear its head whether you like it or not, relatively quickly, as your company's forced to being just more savvy from a big data and AI perspective, and exposing certain data. And you kind of said, John, like, what's cool, but it's also, what if you were in a meeting right now and would you with your competitors, would you be talking about certain things, right? Or if it could be even just on this webcast, would you mention like customer lists? Probably not, right? So it's anything that's confidential, and it's things that you might not realize have value but certainly do. So it's a pretty wide net, right? A pretty big bucket we were talking about in the beginning on protecting that big bucket, and it holds. John and I used to work, ICAP Ocean Tomo. Ocean Tomo had a thing called the Ocean Tomo 300 that was an ETF for IP, and it, they talked about it. I forget what the numbers were, John. Was it 80 or 85% of your market value is in intangibles and
that almost stands whatever the company is, Tim. I've worked with several companies, and that like you say, 80%.
And guess
90%.
How many of those assets are insured right now?
That's right, because you're looking to insure hardware and things that are tangible and right, like, it's
The
easy
insurance
to flood
industry at
insurance,
large,
right? Like,
yeah.
no digital assets were harmed in this fire. Right, so.
The insurance industry's been focused on the wrong thing. And I think, some people have really been thinking about this for several years and have been trying to push the envelope and figure out a way to help companies get their arms around this and develop insurance. That's really what we've been busy doing. So we're a first mover in that space, but we're hoping and expecting that the market will grow dramatically as other organizations, as other companies enter the market with their additional capacity behind what we're already doing, because companies are insuring the wrong, 10% of the value of their company and sleeping well at night behind doing that. I don't get it. I just got back, actually, I went to a couple months ago to an AI conference. It was 2 days. It was called the Sedona Conference. And I was really sort of privileged and humbled to just be able to sit in the audience. But the whole crux of that, the whole genesis of the conversation with judges and lots of litigators and even a couple of lawmakers there was really about, is AI input, the data that goes in, the actual code itself, and the generative AI output, which pieces of that puzzle are insurable by which kind, or protectable, I should say, by which kind of intellectual property. If it's not developed by a human, then it's not patentable or copyrightable. So there's already case law that I think eventually will be overturned, but saying that you can't patent or copyright AI output because it wasn't generated by a human. So trade secrets then, by definition, are the favored way to protect AI inputs and outputs at the moment, as long as you can maintain the confidentiality. And so you have to use closed AI tools. And I think one of my broker friends sent me an email the other day talking about how BYO AI is the new thing. Not bring your own device now, but bring your own AI is the new thing that everybody's terrified about, because they have it on their personal phones. I'm just going to put something right here that talks about, and they're potentially giving away trade secrets without even realizing it. So from an insurance standpoint, we can only insure those assets, for organizations that have a closed AI policy. It's something that we've really been spending a lot of time on. But
awesome. Sorry, I got a dog here. We have got a couple minutes left. We're going to jump off probably 5 minutes before the end of the hour. Final thoughts that, I'll give everyone a couple minutes to kind of talk about where do we think, what are some key takeaways here? And I think a lot of the questions we saw in the comments were, how do we protect trade secrets? So go ahead, man.
Tell your dog I said hi. So protecting trade secrets, again, to me, it really follows what a traditional NIST risk management framework, which is identify, value, mitigate, insure, and then recover. In that cycle, as much immutable evidence as you can provide during that process that you have identified the asset and that you've told the people who are working on it. My good friend and lawyer Mark Halligan calls these the Iona proofs, the existence of the trade secret in the first place, that you owned it, that the people who worked on it had notice, that's the N, and access to it. If you can show the Iona proofs around a person who worked on or had access to that know-how, then you're in a much better position when it comes time to litigate or enforce your rights around that asset. And so the more you can do to put that framework in place with blockchain and other things, the better off you are, because you're creating evidence before you need it. And therefore, if it costs on average $4.2 million to litigate a trade secret claim and takes 3 years, a huge chunk of that is backwards looking discovery that you can avoid completely if you're just ready. So that would be, I think, my biggest takeaway. The other thing I would say is that cyber insurance and crime insurance does not cover this for people who thought that they had coverage under their cyber or crime policy. That's really important for private equity and venture capital who are investing in portfolio companies. and it's important for companies themselves to recognize.
Yeah, I think back to, the title of this, everybody has trade secrets. I've got a patent, but actually in order to make the patent work, back to your tech transfer question and back to our brokerage days, yeah, but what about the know-how? What about the know how this doesn't work? I need to know all of that as well in order to make this patent valuable for my business. That's your trade secret. That's where you're really adding value to what's public out there. And most businesses have these things. So I think, per Mary's point there, don't wait. It's probably going to happen. It's probably happening now. You're probably leaking valuable information. Because if you haven't identified what's valuable in your business, if you haven't sat down and said, what is our competitive advantage? What would we least like our competitor to get hold of? And you haven't sort of prioritized those, then they're probably leaking. So first and foremost, do that for me. Do that today. And then start to put training programs in place, because if you have an educated workforce that knows how to recognize valuable and sensitive information and knows who they can and can't share it with, then that's the second most important thing. And then you need to move on to the process and policy and documentation and registration. And once you've got that in place, you can get some insurance, because then Mary's program will be very, very useful for you and help you should there ever be any breach. And there will be. This is happening all the time. And most people, as Mary's pointing out, the SEC disclosure thing, just aren't aware of it, but they will be very shortly. So first and foremost, a couple of important steps: identify what you've got, and then put the steps in place: employee training, employee contracts, policy process, insurance. Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll reiterate that. So, carrots and sticks for employees. So we're talking about a lot of sticks, right? We're talking about employee contract, and we're watching them, a little bit in terms of computer logging and things like that. But there's also, I think there's some carrots to a degree as well. Who's creating innovation, right? Like who's adding value to the company, right? So, anytime performance measurement in terms of employee performance increases or gets more transparent, like the pay, and it's nice to be knowing that you're doing a good job and getting rewarded for it. So there's other sides to that. There used to be certainly employee, IBM's famous for giving monetary rewards for patents, and there's no reason this can't happen in a trade secret world as well. So
a couple of companies, Tim, that we talked to are doing that now. They're providing incentives, awesome. Financial incentives and others for people who invent something that stays a trade secret, just like they would a patent, which I think is a really nice. By the way, if you follow us on LinkedIn, Crown Jewel, just really quickly, we are going to be posting more formal kind of information about the response to our survey. So just do that, and we'll be posting things in the coming days.
Great. Yeah, and the other thing, as I wrote in my paper, the damages here from trade secrets, and John calls it the greatest corporate theft that's ever occurred. They're not reported. Regulators are not. They don't care if you're losing value internally. They only care that you're protecting the privacy data of your customers. SEC, but a lot of companies are not regulated by the SEC, right? So, everyone has trade secrets. It could be a realty firm, it could be a law firm, it could be a bakery. There's things here you want to protect. John mentioned them: employee onboarding, employee exit policies, having them, officially on paper, acknowledge that the IP they created at the company is not theirs. So those are, pretty high level things I think that small businesses can do to protect themselves. And big companies, they're starting to realize that insider threat is, we're calling this insider threat because they're taking things with them. And I think malicious insider threat, we didn't really get into that as well. Negligence, where employees make mistake and they leak information, I think that's a totally different story, and they kind of get lumped into the same thing because the intent is totally different.
Yep.
and the employees are taking things with them. They know exactly who to sell it to. They know exactly how to get the most money for it. When a foreign attacker attacks you, that's just a different, it's a much different, as I said, intent of attack. So
Yes.
this has been great. Mary, appreciate, certainly in the comments, share your, where they can find you. John, Exalt IP, always great to hear your, posts. So, and for our listeners, thanks for jumping on, and feel free to follow up with any one of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks guys.
Thanks, Tim.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Have a good
Take
one.
care.
Cheers.
Cheers.